We have the amazing Hesh Fernando here to share a bit of his life journey with us, and I'm super excited on having a chat to Hesh and sharing his amazing journey with all of our Inspiring Humans podcast listeners and beyond. Hesh is the founder of The Model Man, which is an incredible organisation that focuses on empowering men, working men in around fatigue and burnout to be their best selves. The Model Man is a social impact organisation focused on helping men basically reach their full potential and become role models for others. And Hesh believes in, and his model reflects the rest-centered performance, which, I just think that's incredible, because I think life is all about helping ourselves first and foremost, but others reach their full potential. And Hesh is an incredible example of what his organisation sets out to achieve. So it's amazing to and I can't wait to dive a bit more into that, Hesh, but also just want to share that you're involved in a lot of other things. And one of them is the Haiti Stole My Heart, which is a lot of the work that you do in Haiti in empowering communities over there. So I'd love to touch on that too. And also, the most interestingly, your life journey and what got you into this. So welcome, Hesh. It's a privilege to have you on this podcast.
Thanks, Steph, and thanks for the wonderful introduction as well.
You're welcome. So love to just hear a little bit about your journey, just to set the context and what led you into working in such a, you've really taken the path less, what's that phrase? Forged your own path, and that is, and you're really having ripple effects and in that area. So I'd love to just hear what set you on that track in the first place.
Yeah, I mean, usually when I tell this story, it begins with my childhood, and I talk about how my childhood was actually pretty fun. It was pretty carefree, innocent. I remember it being, in general, your normal childhood, but as coming into my teenage years, turbulence in our household kind of caused identity shifts in me that took me down the path less traveled. So, I mean, to dive into that, maybe around 12, 13 years old, my parents didn't have the best relationship. Their relationship was starting to break down, and I've talked about this publicly as well, and Dad knows that I talk about this as well. But the whole thing was centered around my dad being stressed out at work, and he pretty much would come home most nights stressed, with a very short fuse. Unable to be present because he had more work to do, and that would have an impact on our family, like a negative impact on me, my brother, and my mother in different ways. And my father wasn't able to be himself, because the man that I know him today as is a leader, somebody who really cares about people, who is willing to sacrifice and do anything to make sure that other people around him are in a good stead. But back then, as a child, you view your parents very differently, especially in your formative years, or in my formative years. And in those years, I formed a very negative opinion on him and the way that he treated our family, based on his reaction to his own stress and having emotional outbursts and being unable to regulate his emotions effectively. But when you're a child, you just don't understand why things are happening. You kind of see it, and then you make decisions based on how you feel about those people and what they've done. And looking back, I can say some of those judgments were justified in my mind, but a lot of them were also in my control to not let run me and who I become as a person in a negative way. And it did for a while. So I saw my own dad's anger, and I kind of adopted that. I saw the way my dad, his relationship to money, and I adopted that. His relationship to stress, and I adopted that. And I remember telling myself around 18, now moving a bit more forward, that I would never be like my father. I made a very aggressive decision in my mind that I would never be like him, and I will never rely on him. The problem with that was I was still a child, and it was kind of hard to live like that, to not be able to rely on him or to be like him. And I ended up becoming exactly like him. I would go as far to say as I am my father's son. And so that journey took me on almost a personal development journey, because I learned at a young age to mediate my parents' challenges that they faced to try and solve their problems. And I recognized I was starting to find more of a sense of happiness and more of a sense of fulfillment when their problems were being solved and there was calm and peace in the house just for a moment. So that really shaped who I was, because I took on the identity of a problem solver. And that's kind of forwarded my journey ever since. So that's where it started. I don't know if you want to ask me anything else about my journey or what else, but that's where it started.
Thanks so much for sharing so authentically as well about your experience, and that's an incredible insight and understanding you have of the situation. I think often, you know, our egos react against certain people and we fail to understand where they're coming from and what might be causing that. And I think, you know, you mentioned something that is absolutely key, which I think is he wasn't able to be himself, you know, in the environment that he was around, and that actually wasn't his true self and his true nature, which is very powerful, you know, because how many of us out there are in that situation where, you know, people might feel that they aren't able to be 100% themselves. And I think that's kind of an amazing starting place for this conversation, and just an amazing point in general, because it's the more we're able to be ourselves and let that incredible true nature and life force out there and you know, in self-expression, that our life becomes easy and effortless, and that we have the biggest impact on others. So it's incredible to actually, you know, hear what you've just said and see what you've created. And obviously it's very in alignment with your passion and purpose and experience, the model man. So if you can just give us a bit of an insight into what exactly the model man is.
Yeah, sure. Well, on what you just said, I believe life is a journey back to ourselves. We come into this world being completely ourselves. We lose ourselves, and then if we become aware enough of who we are, we spend the rest of our lives trying to get back to ourselves. So at what point we get back to who we are, we've found life again. Like, the earlier we do that, the better. So the model man was born out of the journey of me and my father, and my broken relationship with him early on in my life, to not speaking to him for 10 years, like around 10 years, to then coming back and actually working out our differences. Being curious and starting to understand who he was as a man, why he behaved the way he behaved, and understanding more of what he went through rather than the impact that it was having on me. And I switched my focus. So this turned the model man into something where we now go back into organizations and the working professional sector, and we look to help men not go through the same things that we went through. And that's by helping them improve their mental fitness. Because mental fitness is pretty much a combination of your performance and your well-being. And the part that ties back to my father's story is my dad sacrificed his well-being to perform. And a lot of these organizations and a lot of industries out there push people to perform at the sacrifice of their well-being. And that's the culture. And when the culture is like that, you're effectively walking into this pressure cooker every day that forces you to choose that. If you're not strong enough and not grounded enough in your own sense of self and your own self-worth. And that's where people struggle to really find themselves in those organizations. And then they end up taking on stress, taking on pressure, not knowing how to deal with it. And the impacts go far beyond the four walls of the organization. They actually come home with those people and also go out into society with those people and form the society that we have. And it all comes down to character. Because if we are more aware as human beings of the impression our character leaves on others, then we can start to access and change something about the way that we impact people by focusing on becoming better and reaching our full potential, and understanding that that only benefits us, but that impacts the world. And that's how we start to change society. So this is kind of like the link that I saw between me and my father and my family's journey, and how we could use our pain and turn that into something that can give back into this world.
That's really amazing, Hesh, because yeah, as you said, now you're working with your father to actually support others, and it's, you know, you obviously met your dad with love, you know, after being challenged and maybe not talking for a while and that sort of thing, but you actually came from a place of love when you were wanting to connect with him and understand him in different ways. And I think that's, you know, such a powerful example of allowing someone to transform in that presence. I think it's when we meet people with love, and especially, you know, in my experience too, but when people are being the most difficult and you meet them with love, it's it can be very transformative for them. So what an inspiring example. And, you know, the other thing is not to ever point the finger or blame, but I think, you know, the society that we live in is not conducive to the fulfillment and the joy of the human spirit. So I think the last kind of little while, people have actually had the space and time to think about that in more ways than normal, you know, with the time that we've had with global happenings. So it's an incredible time for you to be out there sharing this with corporates. And I'm really curious to see what are some of the experiences and feedback that you've had when you've gone out there into corporates.
Yeah. So at this stage, I launched the Model Man mid last year. And for about 6 months, I was just trying to find myself within the organization. What's the sweet spot? What are we actually trying to achieve here? And also doing the dance with my dad and trying to build a relationship with him in business, which was meaning that we'd have to face our own wounds and go deeper and deeper and deeper into them. So I spent a lot of last year doing that. And in that time, we worked with a lot of working professionals, a lot of managers and a lot of leaders. And we found these men very receptive to the changes that we helped them through. Now, we weren't as structured in the way that we did that back then. We didn't have courses and offerings and things like that. But me and my dad, if there's anything that we're good at, it's problem solving. And what I found is, speaking to my dad, it's in our lineage. My grandfather was an expert problem solver. My grandfather's grandfather was expert problem solver, and it goes as far back as my dad has been told. And what that shows me is a lot of what we do in life is inherited, and then we try to work on that inheritance in our DNA, and that changes our behavior. So me and him then went back into working with these men, and these men responded in such a way that they were able to achieve more of a sense of themselves. They were able to access more of their full potential. And that's what they told us. And that's what actually shaped the company, because we realized, oh, that's what we're doing here. We're really helping them access more of that and kind of free themselves from their own limitations, and also become more powerful in environments that aren't conducive for them to be themselves. Because if we're able to help more and more of the cells within the entire organism of an organization operate at their full potential, we found that if we do this one by one and we focus on that, we can eventually work our way upwards and start to work with executives and CEOs and stuff like that on their own mental fitness, and optimizing their mindset so that they're not limiting themselves. And then that seeps into the culture and has a positive effect. So right now, where we stand, we've worked with quite a few managers, the managerial level and employee level, one-on-one. And we've found that this has really just helped them to achieve greater potential, access more of who they are. And that starts to free up their life, free up their time, free up their energy, and just leave them more free to be, if I had to summarize it in one sentence.
Amazing. And again, I think the space that you create for people to come out and be authentic, you know, you're obviously very authentic yourself, and to create that space is such a gift for people. It really takes you know, cultures in the workplaces to a different level, doesn't it? Starting with the individual to feel, as you said, free to be, and frees their energy up. So yeah, phenomenal, Hesh. And just listening to you, it sounds like you have incredible trust in life and in the process. As you mentioned, you know, informing it in the beginning, it was very kind of loose, and then it's shaped up, and just trusting every step, and just from knowing you personally, just trusting that life will provide in every step of the way, and just going with it. And that takes a lot of courage. So I really want to honour your courage in doing that, and just, you know, the incredible faith and trust that you have. So I'd love to ask you a bit more about that and where that comes from.
The honest truth, I almost act like a paradox. I trust so deeply in what's meant to be, and I trust half the time so little in it while I'm trusting. So it causes me a lot of pain, and that's something that happens behind closed doors. And I want to share that, and I want people to know that's happening, because I'm on a journey of self-discovery forever. Like, this inquiry into who I am as a man, who I am as a person, and getting back to myself, becoming more and more of me, is a never-ending journey. And one thing in life, I've really struggled to believe in myself and really struggled to trust myself and have respect for myself as well. And that's because when I was younger, what was conditioned into me from the world, my family, my role models, wasn't self-affirming. There was a lot of, I guess, limiting beliefs just drilled into me from a very young age. And I could go through thousands of examples, but I've very much struggled to believe in myself. And that's coming from the heart. And I think people around me who've seen me in workspace and things like that, I do believe in the greater good. I do believe that there's a higher being. For me, it's God, that kind of encompasses everything that we do. And I think there's a divine order inside the fabric of reality that's guiding and leading everything to be in its place at the right time. And so I do operate from that place, which is why I've been able to lead such a purpose-filled life and kind of navigate and course correct as I go along to find my way based on listening to that voice within. And also based on the signs that are showing themselves up in my reality that say, hey, you're not going in the right direction, or yep, go further in this direction. So my life has been a lot about trying to stay on the narrow path, because it's always there for us. That narrow path is peaceful, it's happiness, it's joy, it's centered, it's grounded. But it's so easy to get tempted to walk off that path, and it's so easy to get manipulated to walk off that path, even for a second. And when you're off that path, if you're not on the narrow, you're on the broad. And what I've found that leads to is a lot of pain. And coming back to trust, I trust that the narrow path is there. And I'm learning more and more to trust myself and really back myself to walk on it, no matter what is thrown at me. I almost don't trust myself to stay on there, because I'm so aware of the path now, and I've been on it so consistently more and more as I'm going forward. I think that's almost a blessing and a curse, because then self-awareness can be that. If you're hyper self-aware of everything that's going on around you and everything that's going on within you, you can often open yourself up to even more self-sabotage than people who, I guess, aren't as aware of who they are as a person, because you can let life run you a little bit easier at those points in time and almost flow a little bit easier in the pain. But when you recognize there's a clear distinction between the narrow and the broad, that's when life becomes a real challenge. And that's when things became really challenging for me around my self-worth, which is tied to my self-respect and my self-trust, because I would notice when I'd get off the path, and then I'd beat myself up for getting off the path, because I was aware that it was happening. And I'm still doing that now, and I'm learning that aspect of well-being, because that's where the well-being and performance part comes in for the model man. The performance part is I've been drilled to perform and define my self-worth and my performance. And if I'm not meeting that standard, in this case, staying on the narrow path, I get really, really hard on myself, because I've had limiting beliefs drilled into me about my self-worth and believing in myself. And I really do beat myself up. I've gone as far as to physically hit myself before, and just being on autopilot, because I'm saying, you've done a bad job, what are you doing? And I've had to calm myself down, breathe, and say, hey, none of this is you, and none of this is your fault. You're doing your best, you're trying your best, you're putting the effort. That's where your success should be defined. Are you trying? And I think you and I have discussed this, Steph, about not beating ourselves up for like doing what we consider the wrong thing, when we're trying to do the right thing in the long game. And that's where my journey around God has come in, and seeing things in the bigger picture, but then also being able to drill down into the smaller picture every single day and do the little things it takes to walk that narrow path.
Super interesting. I'd love to just unpack a little bit more the narrow path for people that are thinking, what's the narrow path? What's the, just a little bit more? What are some more examples that you can share?
Yeah, I'll use the analogy that life is like a river. And a river, if you think about it, everyone's in their own river and everyone's floating in their own lane. Sometimes those rivers cross and we connect for a moment in time. Like right now, our rivers are crossing, but you'll continue to float on down your river and I'll continue on to float down mine. And if you imagine the whole world, this is happening with every single person, and it's all beautifully interconnected and perfect in its timing. And what happens is people sometimes try to swim against the current, the natural current of the river. They also don't trust when the river goes left or right. They think that the river is straight. And life is not a straight path. As much as we're trying to stay on the narrow path isn't straight. So there's a difference. Because I think a lot of the time when people picture something narrow and a singular path, they picture just one line straight forward, and that's not how it works. The path is windy, the path has roadblocks, the path has challenges, because the narrow path is actually where you grow and you learn how to walk on a tightrope effectively. But coming back to the river analogy, what causes a lot of people pain is the current flows in a certain way for their life. And if they just naturally go with the current, trust it when it goes left or trust it when it goes right, and trust that it'll course correct and take them back to center eventually, then there's going to be a lot less pain for people going on their journey in life. What that looks like practically is a challenge shows up in your life today that has been a challenge for you, maybe around self-belief or trusting yourself. And you feel like you've gone a bit off the path of what you wanted to do for your day, because you're just going on a whim that, hey, life has taken me this way, but I'm going to trust it. And it's a sense of dealing with whatever's in front of you and trusting that no matter what decision you're making, in the bigger picture, it's the correct decision, always. And that's where the pain goes away, because then even if you're walking right into what I call the valley, or where the shadows are, or where things get difficult, then your trust, it takes real courage and trust to walk into that area, into darkness, into facing ourselves, into challenges with other people and society, with complete peace in your heart, knowing that eventually you'll come out the other side of that thing better and be back right in the center of your river, and that the river will start flowing more straight once again. Because human beings really want that straight and narrow feeling, but they're not willing to accept that life actually twists and turns and has rocks in the river that you hit, and that challenges are going to come up, and people struggle to deal with that. And that's where mental fitness is important. And this shift from prioritizing performance over well-being to prioritizing well-being over performance. Because if human beings do that and start to prioritize in their life their own well-being, which comes down to their self-worth, and that's tied into how much you believe in yourself and how much you love yourself, you are able to really start to drill down on those things practically in your life, how to cultivate that within yourself. Then suddenly when you're going off course in the river and the current's taking you a different direction, you don't feel any fear. And that's what I'm trying to work myself towards. I'm not there yet either, but I've discovered it. And that's the first step, because I'm like, oh, that's how it works. Okay, how do I show up in challenge with complete belief and backing of who I am, and also loving myself in those moments that even if it's difficult, Hesh, like, you deserve the best, you deserve love. Don't worry, like, this is only temporary. This needs to happen now for your own greater good. Like, see the bigger picture. Like, being able to have that positive self-talk in that moment is everything. And the difference between human beings who really struggle through life and find pain, and those that actually succeed with ease and flow.
Yeah, your self-awareness is inspiring, Hesh. And as you were speaking, getting these visuals of the river, flowing the river, and there's a rock that people are like desperately clinging to, and everyone has been, I suppose, at different times, but and then like floating on the water. If you start to struggle around, you kind of sink. Otherwise, it can be a beautiful ride. So thanks for sharing some visuals with us. So I'd love to ask you a bit more about and I hope you don't mind me sharing this, but when I first met you, you have a very special kind of gift of having the intuition, but also I remember you shared with me, and I kind of, at the time I was like, oh my God, that's so interesting and intriguing that you saw kind of green pastures around me and green hills. And like, I'd love to kind of delve a bit more deeply into not the green hills, but that ability that you have, and the you know, coupled with the trust and the faith that you've been talking about, and your belief in the greater good, which for you mentioned is God.
Yeah. Yeah, I forgot that happened actually. It's funny when someone reminds you of a moment in time. So I believe we have physical gifts as human beings, and I believe we also have spiritual gifting. And I think spiritual gifting is something that is hard to distinguish and hard to believe that you have. But I've known since I was a young boy that I had visions, and I got visions, and visions was something that I just get. And it was coupled with a sense of knowing, and then also imagery would just show up around a person who was ready to receive a message from what I believe to be God. This is not something that I often share with people, but also as part of being with the model man, it's about sharing more of ourselves and all of ourselves. And for a long time, I was uncomfortable sharing the spiritual aspect of who I was as a person and my spiritual development, because I didn't believe I'd be accepted for the things that I was sharing, especially when I was, I don't know, in my mid-20s, and I was really starting to discover that there was something bigger to my life here, and there was something else that was guiding, and it was very clear to me. Like, to me, it was as clear as day. But in a society that I felt wasn't as receptive to those kind of things, I almost felt a bit like I should hide this and only speak to people who were going down that path and physically with me at the time, and everyone else can just see the other side of Hesh. And that was effectively me putting on a mask. And also, there was a lot of fear around having to explain to people, oh, you get visions, oh, you have spiritual giftings, like, what are you talking about? Because I did speak up about it a few times with close friends, where they were just like, oh, no, that's just your brain reacting, it's the science, it's this, it's that. And I'm like, there's no way to prove any of this exists or anything's real, really. If you look at reality in its essence, there's no way to prove that anything is the way it is. We formulate and we hypothesize everything, and we come up with mathematical formulas and equations and chemical balances and all of that, but nothing can actually be proven as physical and like to be true. We just make truth based on comparison, really, over and over and over and over again, and looking for patterns. So in that, I saw that in my spiritual journey, and I hid that for a long time, but I do definitely get visions. The vision that I got with you at that time was green pastures, and we were having a very spiritual moment with that group in that house. And the space was opened up by our good friend Christian, actually, for spirit and for, I guess, higher being to be accessed inside of all of us. So we were more interconnected to not only ourselves, but each other in that room in a way that was very spirit-led. And I think science is catching up to this kind of stuff more and more as well. But we live in a predominantly I'll believe it when I see it kind of world still. I think everyone has their own spiritual practices, but there's a difference between being spiritual, like if I put it in quotation marks, and actually being connected to something greater, like in your spirit. I believe that we are not physical beings, we're spiritual beings that have a physical body. And again, that sounds like a lot of woo-woo still to a lot of people, but I think there's actually some hard truth to that. And if we really are willing to look inside and start to dive into who we are, I think all we will end up discovering is that we are more spiritual than we are physical. And then that's what starts to activate, I guess, supernatural or spiritual gifts. So visioning is one of mine. I'm able to connect the dots forward, so almost vision into the future quite often, but it's not off my own accord. Like, I haven't mastered any of these. I can't just say I'll do this at the click of a finger. It's more when God wants it to happen, it'll happen, and it will happen with intention and purpose in a moment, because somebody would need to receive a message. I've gone through seasons where it was happening every day, and I've gone through all sorts of spiritual experiences at those times, and then I've gone through periods where it didn't happen for a year. So it's really comes down to, I trust that God will let that happen when it needs to happen. So it's not something that I need to wield or use as a superpower of any sorts, because people see that in movies that there's superpowers and things like that. And I actually believe all human beings have access to a lot of these things. And the more that we wake up and the more we become interconnected, the more we become a spiritual planet than a physical planet, and predominantly move towards spirit, I think these kind of things just start to open up naturally for people. And you'll find a lot of people around the world who have spiritual giftings and really stand in them, and they're very unique. And people see them, but it's also kind of like hard to comprehend.
And it's so, that whole kind of realm is so at odds with the current state of play. Like, I'm just imagining you with, with this understanding and living with this philosophy and this faith and the, your connection, going into corporates, which are largely based on competition, and it's so much at odds with what you've just shared with us, which is, and I'm a great believer in that too. Everyone's got their own God-given gifts, and it's when we actually, and for you to have those visions and things, to a large extent you need to get out of the way, do you know what I mean, to let that through. And it's when we let that through us, and because we are creative beings, we're creator beings, and it's almost co-creation then with the divine and with God, actually just getting out of the way and letting that through us. And I think that will self-correct, as you said, like the river, that's what will change the world and have the biggest knock-on effects to other people, which you're a great example of, Hesh.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So interesting. And I just wanted to go back and talk a little bit around the time of transformation for you, when you started to find your purpose, because I think all of us really, to a certain extent and at different extents, are just really wanting to embrace our life purpose and step into that more and more. So what was that process like for you?
Yeah. I'll answer this question by giving advice to people on how to find purpose. So for me, it was looking at what is my life's training been? Like, what have I really been trained in? And then what special skills did I develop? And what strengths did I develop out of all of that? Be very clear on that, and then look for a way to give back using your life's training into the world. That's to put it simply. And using an analogy, I would say, think of everyone being a soldier that's gone into training throughout their childhood, and you're a soldier that's being trained and trained and trained and trained. And then you eventually become who you are as an adult. And there's limiting beliefs that you have about yourself, or limiting factors that have shaped who you are. And there's affirming factors that shape who you are. And it's a combination of understanding the pain that you've been through there's a reason for it. Any pain that you've been through and you've come over the other side, that's where your purpose lies for any human being, because that's where we've conquered something that's painful and we've been able to overcome it. Therefore, it's our duty to give that back into the world in a way where we help people who are going through that thing overcome that. Now, why my purpose took so long to form and formulate, because there was a massive journey traveling throughout the world before I came back to Australia finally, and landed and actually understood what this was all about. Then had the confidence to even speak about it to people and start to step into doing this. There was like a 10-year journey to that. But oh wait, I just lost my train of thought. My purpose was inside of clearly understanding how my pain was meant to serve the greater good. And that's what I was saying. So my pain has been collectively unique to me, where I've been through such a variance of different pains and different challenges in my life, that I feel like I can help a lot of people overcome a lot of things, because I've been through a lot of pain on the spectrum of pain. I've been at the lowest of the low and the darkest of the dark in my mind. And I've been everywhere else in between, in terms of all, I guess, like mental illness, physical illness, probably emotional illness as well, being able to not regulate my emotions, and I've overcome a lot of it. So on the other side of that, I'm like, oh, I can help people get from A to B now in a lot of different ways. And how do you encompass all the different pains we go through in life into a singular thing that you can help people through? That's what becomes a challenge. And I chose fatigue and burnout because that tied into my dad's story. That's the reason I chose it. So you got to really know your own story, see how you were trained within that story, and then almost put the pieces together in a way where you're like, okay, I've come out the other side. This is what I've learned, and this is who I've become, and this is where I want to go in life. Now, how can I actually serve people with those learnings? And that's where purpose really starts to then formulate, and it becomes an iterative process. It's not like I'm just going to get this in one day. Actually, it may be true for some people. Maybe some people do get it in one day, but for me, it was 10, probably a decade before I finally landed on the thing. It was multiple businesses before that. It was finding myself. It was personal development. It was different jobs. Like all of that was just training, and developing me, developing my character so that I'd be ready to lead this charge. That's all it was for. And there's so much of God will use the entire world to teach you one lesson. Like God's really like that. He might do something in Africa that just you watch over there, and it's about the entire country, and you just learn one lesson from that changes your entire life. Life is very much about massive things happening for the purpose of one person or a couple of people just getting a very tiny lesson out of it to continue their journey down their river. Which I think is a really cool thing to notice about life.
That's really interesting because, thinking about my personal journey, it's almost like as well, there are a number of those things that happen. If you don't listen or get the first one, it's like the next one comes and it's a bit clearer or a bit, it's like a friend of mine, Paul Davis, explains it as like a feather, then a brick, then a truck, runs into. I think sometimes, lessons that we're meant to stop and learn and evolve, as humans, can come in different forms and, more clearer if we don't catch it the first time. Wow, I just listening to you, I was thinking of the phrase "your struggle is your message," which does makes a lot of sense. And I remember being in the social enterprise world and sector. I remember kind of thinking, these people are so passionate about what they do, including myself, with my developing 7 women, and doing a bit of self-reflection on, why am I so passionate? What kind of urged me to, support these women? And it just reminded me of that as you were speaking, because it's like, our struggle is our message. And I must have seen something in those women that, felt kind of like, I've got to do something about this, because it was kind of personal to me. So that's a really awesome little tip and clue that you've given people that are looking for what is that thing that they want to dedicate their life to, and what's the example that they want to be, and how. So amazing, Hesh. Unreal. Is there anything else that you want to share about your personal journey that would maybe help others with where they're at? I know a lot of people at the moment are, a lot of people that I know are maybe at a crossroads, or have had time to reflect and thinking, what do I want to do with the rest of my life? What legacy do I want to leave? That sort of thing.
Yeah. Again, see, I channel what comes through, right? It's not, I don't sometimes look to answer. This is why I enjoy these conversations so much, because half the time I'm not even speaking. It's just what flows through me naturally. And I let that come out without trying to make my own judgments of what you're saying and then formulate an answer. And what came to me is prioritize your peace. Like really prioritize your peace. And the reason I say that is, if we're doing that, life flows from that place and everything starts to work. If we're taking back to the analogy of the river, if you're prioritizing your peace as you're going down that river, you're not fighting the current. You're trusting in the moments where the current goes left and right. You trust that at the end you will reach your destination, which is how life works always. If you trust and you let go, and you're okay with being wherever the river takes you, eventually, guaranteed, you'll end up exactly where you're meant to be. And if we start to live like that, a whole lot of peace just comes naturally into our lives, and we start to then be able to model that for other people, because then what happens is, while other people are floating down their river and they're panicking, they see you're just kind of like arms back, like floating down the river. You're pretty peaceful, and maybe the current takes you at like 100 kilometers an hour, and you're completely calm inside. And people are like, how is he doing that? Like, what is it about him or her or that person that is so calm and unreactive in those situations? I want to be more like them. And that's when people start to want to learn and mimic and their role models, because our society works on role modeling. If you really look at it, everyone looks for somebody else to follow and something else to believe in, especially when we're lost and we're trying to figure ourselves out, and we're all just trying to help each other get down our river to the same destination, I believe, which is beyond this life and where the real goal is. But in this lifetime, we've been given this opportunity to enjoy and experience the nature of God, because I believe that's what physical life is. It's the expression of God. And we've been given an opportunity in a blink of an eye to enjoy it, which is our life. And if we don't enjoy every moment as we're going, and we're not peaceful while the current's taking us different places and all over the place, we're actually not in life in those moments. And we're losing the opportunity God has given us to really experience what this world is about and really see the beauty and even the struggle. Because the people who see that and are actually clued into it and can lock into it and can trust on a deep level in those moments, those are the people who end up having the most fulfilling, inspiring, magical life, because they actually view life that way. No matter how it's turning out, you see the bigger picture of it, that it's all just magical and wonderful, and just like an experience where we're meant to enjoy the ride.
And I think, having that philosophy and seeing the magic in life brings more of it, doesn't it? It's, that abundant way of seeing the world, and just appreciation and gratitude for, as you said, the incredible things that we experience in this human lifetime is so, it brings more and more of it into the life, into our own lives. So, Hesh, that's amazing. Thanks so much for all of your words of wisdom. And just had one more question kind of before we ended, which was around, has there been a constant in your life that has really strengthened you on your journey? And, if so, what has that been?
Yeah. Again, just what flowed to me then. The one constant in my life, even before I realized it was a constant, was God. In my life, I believe I was dead and gone a long time ago. Like, I wasn't living, even though I was living. Like, spiritually, I was dead. And I had given up all hope on who I was as a person. And I was in a very, very dark path. And I was very deep and dark, in a dark part of the river. And I was not going to come out. And something dragged me out. And I know it wasn't me. And I get emotional every time I talk about it, because I saw how helpless and how broken and how gone I was as a person. If you know my story, there's been a lot of moments where that just like dug me deeper and deeper into the darkness. And seeing that God was a constant the whole way through, and looking back, I can see it. There was just that something greater that loved me more than I loved myself. And even in the times where I was really struggling, because my whole life had bottled down to just having no self-worth at all, something else dragged me out. And I can never forget that. And then when I met Jesus as a person, and when I had that spiritual experience that I've told you about, there was no denying that it was real for me. And after that became my constant in a brand new way, because that redefined my life from then on. It's like, I saw what I saw. I experienced that in my kitchen. I can't unsee that. And there was no denying it from then on. So even though the pain started increasing after that, because then I really started to take on life at that point. And I went through just really deep pain in facing who I was and undoing my own self-worth. I was able to hold on to, literally by a fingernail on the edge of a cliff sometimes, just hold on, because I knew that God was like pulling me through this, and there was a reason that everything was happening. Just having that reassurance that something greater than me is constantly there all the time is what has gotten me through, and is what's leading me to what I know is going to be my purpose in life and great change in the world. I know that it's going to happen. Spiritually, mentally, I'm still working on believing in myself, and that's where, once the two merge and I get that sense of trust and respect for myself on a deep level, then there's nothing that's going to be able to stop me from doing anything that I want to do, manifesting anything that I want, and creating any change that I want. And that applies to everyone on earth. That's not just like for me because I realized all these things and I'm special or anything like that. In fact, the more we step into these things, the more we realize how insignificant we are, and the more okay we are with that. And that really is what leads to peace being the center of my life. So yeah, I'd say God is the constant.
Hesh, there's so many golden nuggets in this little episode. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and all of, it's, I think, in hearing others' journeys and also hearing them so authentically as you've shared with us today, it's really transformative for people listening and including myself, just to hear it expressed the way you express it, and to have the privilege of having that insight and also kind of to know you. So thanks a million, much appreciated, and I can't wait to share this with everybody.
Thanks for this moment down the river, Steph. I love these kind of conversations, honestly. It doesn't even feel like work. It feels like just two friends chatting about life and sharing that out in the world. And I love this kind of stuff. So thank you for creating the space for it to happen.
No worries. Thanks, Hesh.
Awesome, Steph. I'll see you soon.